So think of the old slide projector. Instead of slides in it, it's got a round in it, and that's below the turret ring. That goes around, the gun goes level, and an autoloader rams the shell in the breech, then rams in the charge behind it, and then it can fire off. So what we're looking at there is the T-72, very low profile without that loader in it. And again, this particular one, the T-72M, it's the export version. A number of these were sold on all around the world, again into the Middle East. Many countries are still using the T-72. So this T-72 goes up to Salisbury Plain on a regular basis as part of training exercises, and it takes part as part of the op force against the British Army. 125mm, the gun is actually stabilised on there as well. And in the back there's a 740 horsepower diesel engine, and you can see also on the back where they'd add sometimes 200 litre fuel drums. Now that whopping tank that's driving around as well in front of you, one of the Cold War answers to the Soviet IS-3 tank. What happened in America and in Britain, we had nervousness that our in-service tank at the end of the 1940s, early 50s wasn't going to be good enough or powerful enough to take on the IS-3. So in Britain we built the Conqueror tank, and the whole idea, it was supposed to complement the Centurion tank that it fought with. The Conqueror had a 120mm gun, just like here we're looking at the 120mm gun that's on the American M103 tank. Again, the idea being that the M47, M48 tanks, they've got a lower caliber gun on them. Could they take on the IS-3 with that thick armour? So they decided to build a tank that would have an overwatch role. And this M103 was there to do that. What happens, of course, is very quickly the British designed the L7 105mm gun. And that means that that Conqueror tank and this M103 become redundant, because the L7 has such superb penetration, it could take on any Russian tank, so we don't need these super heavy beasts like the M103. The American military, they handed over about 156 of these to the American Marines, which was slightly surprising, thinking the Marines are going to be quite often coming off a landing craft. Are they going to actually be able to land a vehicle that big and that heavy? It had two loaders in the M103 because again the ammunition is now in two parts, and they didn't see much service life, and our version there actually comes from the American Marines. Now the M60, that followed the M48 tank. Basically the Americans designed the pattern tank after World War II, and the series M47, M48, M60s, they're almost the same tank growing. What the M60 is it's like an M47 on steroids, gets bigger, thicker armour, bigger turret, and by now they've got available to them that British L7 105mm gun. And the whole issue about the L7, why everyone goes on about it, it's sold all around the world, it's put on lots of tanks. The M60 has it, the American, also the German Leopard 1 has it, the first American Abrams have the 105 gun. It can fire a range of ammunition, discarding sabot at enemy tanks, so that slug of tungsten again. It can fire high explosive, it can fire smoke rounds, canister rounds were fired from the 105, so lots of pellets. And again, that was very useful if you're trying to clear vegetation or human wave attacks, as happened in Korea at certain times. So that range of ammunition, very, very important, and a very successful export weapon. Now they started building the M60, and what we're looking at is the A1 version. It's got some improvements on it. Back in October 62, they start going into service. The A1 version's got a new turret on it, slightly larger number of rounds, 63 rounds compared to the earlier turret, which only could carry 57 rounds. They only built these at a slow pace, but then when there was a number of wars in the Middle East, especially 73, they upped the pace of building the M60. They were doing sort of almost like trickle builds to keep the factory going. Then all of a sudden, lots of other countries in the Middle East ended up wanting to order the M60, and America, of course, when it got the M1 going into service, handed on a lot of their M60s to countries like Greece, Portugal, Spain, Turkey, and M6 is still in service in those countries to this day. Now the M60 parking up behind the M103, and the smaller tank now driving around is a Swedish vehicle. This one is what they call a tank destroyer. Again, in the Cold War, Sweden's worried about its borders. Would the Soviets come across? They designed a number of very radical new designs, including this one, the IKV-91. And the idea here is the Swedes have got lots of lakes up in their northern territories. Obviously the winter months in Sweden are pretty cold as well. They designed a tank that could work, or in this case, sorry, I should call it as it really is, a tank destroyer that would work in very cold temperatures and also be amphibious. What you can do here is this vehicle has got relatively thin armour on it. It will stop about 20mm caliber rounds coming at it. It's got a low pressure gun, a 90mm low pressure gun. But the idea is, because it's amphibious, it can cross those lakes and get to defensive positions that heavier armour couldn't get to. And again, it's got that rather jazzy Swedish camouflage scheme on it. Again, obviously winter months it goes into white. The rest of the year it's got this faceted camouflage scheme. So fully amphibious, tracks propel it through the water. 59 rounds carried for that low pressure gun, and again, if you're firing chemical weapons or heat rounds, that means you don't need a lot of force. In other words, it can still penetrate quite a bit of armour. Drivers in the front, and you've got obviously 2 other crew members there up in the turret. Torsion bar suspension, that's that twisting metal bar that keeps that tank well sprung. Now we're brought on a recovery Centurion driving around now. Very important point to make, if a tank breaks down it's no good to anyone. The Centurion ARV, they were basically built up on Mark II Centurion tanks. They build that superstructure up on the top, cram it full of recovery equipment. Sometimes they fit a 7.62 machine gun on the front there. And what with spades on the back, you can see on the rear there's anchor spades. They could dig in the ground and then use their winch to winch vehicles or tow them. Sometimes they do a straight tow with hollybone bars, those rigid metal bars, designed in such a way that if you put too much pressure at such an angle, the bars collapse, you don't end up ruining things. The idea of the winch, if you use snatch blocks and tackle, they can actually tow up to 90,000 kilograms. So normally on a straight pull, 30,000. With the snatch blocks, you can pull something behind you up to 90,000. 345 of those ARV variants are built, still in use again, and we use this particular ARV to manoeuvre some of our vehicles. And again, I mentioned that recovery role. REME crews would crew these for the British forces. Very important because, of course, in the Second World War, the Germans in particular lost a lot of armoured vehicles because they couldn't recover them from the battlefield. We saw that FAMO tractor, the 8-ton, not armoured. So 3 of those were needed to recover a Tiger 1. Until they got the Berg Panther, the armoured recovery Panther tank, a lot of Tigers had to be left or abandoned or blown up on the battlefield because there simply wasn't a way of recovering them. So having armoured recovery, very important. Now, this is our guest Centurion tank, a Mark 12, a late model Mark 12 tank they're driving around. Probably most people, I think, with any sense would argue the best tank ever designed. Superb bit of British engineering from the end of the Second World War, and in why it's so good is it could be up-armoured and up-gunned. Just like those American Patton series of tanks, they got them bigger, they got them better. With the Centurion, it starts its life 1945, rushed out to the European conflict, missed the end of the war by a few weeks. It's armed then with a 17-pounder gun. They then put the 20-pounder gun on, very effective gun, and of course then in the late 50s they then decide to put the 105 gun on it, and that's what we're seeing driving around now, that 105mm gun. That made a superb tanking weapon. with a Meteor engine in the back. Again, it's got mobility. They thicken the armour during the course of its production run, and again, a great export success. 4,400 Centurions were built, over 2,500 were exported. They see action in Korea, they see action in Vietnam with the Australian forces. The South Africans still using the Centurion tank. They call it the Oliphant. They've again put up even more armour on the outside. Doesn't look like a traditional Centurion anymore, but again, very, very impressive tank. And again, probably the last generation of tank that the crew could fit relatively easily itself with a hammer or a spanner, because most of the mechanical systems were very simple inside. Now we're looking then at for the British forces, the Centurion's replacement. We're looking there at the Chieftain. And when we see the Chieftain, again looking at those three areas, the British Army's lesson from World War II, we wanted more protection on our tank, and boy did we want firepower. We were fed up at the end of World War II. We never wanted to go to war again with a tank that was outgunned by the enemy. And with that 120mm gun that they put on the Chieftain there, that was leaps and bounds ahead in sophistication compared to the late war tank guns. What you've really got there, that very long barrel means it's very accurate. It would fire two-part ammunition, so the round goes in followed by a bag of explosive that are kept in protected liquid bins, as I mentioned earlier, wet stowage inside just below the turret, and it was superbly accurate. The gun on the end of the barrel, and you'll see it on the Challenger 1 that's following it, has a little rubber cap on the end of the barrel. Under that cap there is a mirror, and a light can be shone from inside the tank to that mirror, bounces back inside, and it's called a muzzle reference system, and it makes sure that that barrel is not warped in any way or bent in any way before the gun fires. So that can take out an enemy tank first round out to about 2.5 kilometres away, and that is stunningly accurate. Most of the time in World War II, a tank would fire a round over, one round under, and if we're lucky, the third round's about on target. Not anymore. Of course, the weak point of the Chieftain was the engine in the back, the famous L60 multi-fuel engine built by British Leyland. It took a lot of time and energy to make that reliable, certainly compared to things like the MTU diesel engine in the back of the Leopard. But in a way, we often say here, Chieftain was a great success story for the British, did its job out in Germany because it never had to fire its gun in anger. That Cold War never became a hot war, and thanks to vehicles like that Chieftain and the crews behind them. Now the Challenger 1 tank that's followed the Chieftain, that's a tank that was originally designed for the Shah of Iran. It was taken over as a project when MBT-80 failed, a tank project in Britain to replace the Chieftain, and we ended up taking over the Shear 2 tank project, put Chobham armour on it, and that's why it's got that look. What you're really looking at with Challenger 1 is a tank that underneath its skin is a Chieftain in many respects, but with a new engine and Chobham armour, that very clever British invention, ceramic, rubber, all sorts of clever things there that have great stopping, penetration, ability. What you can't do with Chobham is bend it. That's why Challenger 1 has a lovely faceted shape. Now Challenger 1, we'll see it again in our little Cold War, our Gulf War battle a bit later on, so we can talk a little bit more about Challenger later on. What we're also looking at, again, a brilliant bit of German design after World War II, now driving around the Leopard. We've seen the Leopards drive earlier. What happens, the German military are reconstituted in 1955, the Bundeswehr gets going again. They start designing a new tank, they bring back Ferdinand Porsche again, can you believe? He comes back and they help build the standard Panzer. The Panzer 1, it then becomes Leopard 1 as the standard Panzer was called. Fantastic mobility with the MTU diesel, 2,400 of them were built. Light protection, very good mobility. They then move on to the tank that's coming on now, the Leopard 2. And the Leopard 2, where the Germans were very clever, they said they wanted firepower and mobility at the top of the agenda. With Leopard 2, they bring up, and almost with equal balance, you've got the firepower with the Rheinmetall 120mm gun. You've got that MTU diesel for mobility, and now with Leopard 2, levels of protection that are really increased. And again, Leopard 2 replaces Leopard 1 in not just German military service, they sell it again all around the world. This particular Leopard was bought, one of 445, can you believe, by the Dutch military. The Dutch military subsequently, they sold on their Leopards. Many of them ended up going to countries in South America, some went to Finland, and like many countries, Canada, where our Leopard, one of our other Leopard ones came from, they got rid of their tanks. There was that period at the end of the Cold War, people thought tanks weren't going to be needed again. Both the Canadians and the Dutch realised they'd made a mistake. The Canadians, when they went to Afghanistan, realised they got rid of their Leopard 1 tanks, they wanted them back again, so they bought more off the Germans. The Dutch now end up renting Leopard 2A5s off the Germans, and they train with a battalion of Leopard 2A5s as part with the German military nowadays. And for good or ill, that's the truth of it, tanks are coming back. Because of the fighting going on in places like the Ukraine, older model tanks have been dug out of storage, upgraded, or used simply because of their simplicity. Tank fighting in the Ukraine, many times now they're not using radios because interception going on. They're ending up doing back to First World War tactics of writing on a piece of paper, handing it to a runner, and they go back with a message. They're using T-54 tanks, simple mechanics, because there's very little electronics in there to be affected by pulse weapons and other ways of disrupting. So again, the simplicity of some of these earlier tanks means they still have a validity on the battlefield. And one of the issues going on with Western armour at the moment, certainly upgrades going on. The British with Challenger 2 tank, we're now at the point where we're looking at upgrading our Challengers. There's a competition on. Tanks, as I mentioned, are back in fashion. So as you can see, we're parading off our Cold War armour, doing a rather impressive circuit there for you. Looked like our Centurion, looked like it's slightly overheated again. They had slight problems yesterday, we may have to recover that one. But meanwhile, I'll let you enjoy the engine notes of these vehicles driving around.
Another follower now. Can I say something? Come. Yeah, really good. Guys, you can see the IS-3 now. That's what I wanted to say. IS-3 is coming. There he is. IS-3. Hey there, Gamble, Signal, and Darky, Nels. I heard it. I talked with Bess about that he could not come, Signal. Too bad. I hope everything is going to be fine soon for you. I hope you can hear me, by the way. was niet die tegen Oh.
So, ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know what's going on, obviously we're probably going to have
Good
to
that you could
recover
hear
our
me, man.
Centurion tank there. So we'll have a few minutes break before we move on to our battle display, which will also take a little bit of setting up. So now might be the time. We'll give you a bit of a warning again, a 5-minute warning, if we need to let you to come back in the arena. So if you do want to have a quick piddle, go and fill the water bottle again, or get an ice cream, now's the time to do it. Before
Guys, I'm going to take some water.
Basically, we've got a 3-part battle for you this afternoon. We're going to look at tank operations in 3 different periods.
Guys, I'm going to end it for just now. Maybe the signal is pretty okay, so maybe we're going to do more shows, okay? Yeah, they bought the ice cream just for the Weekend Wasp. I see you guys later, and I'm going to make more of those little streams with shows, okay? Bye bye. Just check out the video, Kermit. See you later.